Yo, what's going on, sports world? It's your boy Jay Chestnut, and we back in that pound for pound sports lounge, and it's time for another sit down. So let's talk about it. Okay, so today we're talking reaction to the NFC Championship game. I know most have probably seen it by now. The Detroit Lions squander a 17-point halftime lead to the San Francisco 49ers. The 49ers win by a score of 34-31 in what was a very eventful game. Didn't quite go the way that I thought it would go, the way I predicted that it would go. But it's a lot to talk about in this game for sure. So I'm going to try to cover everything within maybe 15, 20 minutes, possibly 25. So bear with me. Definitely a lot to get to. So I kind of want to look back at some of the keys that I thought would be successful for both teams in this game. When you look at, for me, I said for San Francisco, I thought they had to pressure Jared Goff, which in the first half, oddly enough, man, it didn't seem like their defensive line got any kind of pressure on Jared. They couldn't stop the run. The back end didn't do anything as far as the secondary goes. They really didn't do a whole bunch, right? Like Jared Goff had clean pockets, especially when he was coming off of play action. It almost seemed like it froze the defensive line because they were getting they were essentially getting their asses handed to them in the first half. I think everything that Ben Johnson called yesterday in the first two, maybe 2.5 quarters, seemed like it was like they couldn't miss on a play call. Um, so for that, like it definitely wasn't going the way that I thought it would have went early. But later on in the game, as Detroit essentially started giving San Francisco life, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the video. It definitely got to a point where the defensive line definitely started to have its imprint on the game. We started to see the run lanes get smaller and smaller. We saw Bosa start to put pressure on Jared Goff. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he had a sack or two in the second half of that game. I can't remember correctly. I'm definitely doing this reaction kind of organically without looking at any stats or anything of that nature right now. So I'm kind of just going off the cuff of this game. So pressure Jared Goff was my key to victory for the 49ers. For Detroit, I feel like I was actually spot on with Detroit. The thing I wrote down here was make the 49ers one dimensional. And for those who may have watched the preview video, I'm not sure um, how many did, but if you go back and listen to that, the biggest thing I said was to make them one dimensional, to not allow the avalanche effect of what the 49ers can do to teams. Because what they like to do is they like to get that running game going early, get Brock Purdy into play action scenarios where you have Kittle, Ayuk, Debo running down the middle of the field wide open. Now, statistics will tell you obviously that not Jared Goff, I'm sorry, Brock Purdy has completed the most tight window throws in the NFL, and he can make some tight window throws. But when you look at him, when games get tight, the biggest question for San Francisco was, were they equipped to win those type of games with their offense pretty much being predicated off the run game? And I explained that when I dropped the preview video, that system that Shanahan runs is not meant for a volume passer. It's not meant for a guy to sit back and throw the ball 35, 40, 45 times in a game. It's just not built that way, which was why his record going into this postseason, when you were down by 7 or more points in the second half, was 4-42 or 2-42. I can't remember if the 4 came, if they had 2 wins coming in or 4. But I know in the fourth quarter, down by 7 points or more, they were 0-31 before the Packers game last Saturday night, right? So when we look at that game, when we look at what Detroit did, Detroit took the opening possession, scored a touchdown. San Francisco goes down, they missed the field goal. Detroit gets it back, goes back down, scores a touchdown. Brock Purdy throws a terrible interception in the second quarter. They go down and make that one and catch that one in. So they did what I thought they needed to do. They kept the game competitive, and they kept the pressure on San Francisco to where they were getting to the point of making them one dimensional. And in the first half, I felt like they kind of did, which is why Brock Purdy was a little bit up and down, much like the game a week ago against Green Bay, where when they were asking him to throw a lot last week, he was not good. He had that kind of same roller coaster effect, that up and down. He'll throw a great ball one play and throw a ball that hits a defender right in the hands. So, and as the game went on, as Detroit gave them life, that is what allowed them to go back to the balancing of their offense, which really just kind of calmed Brock Purdy down. And then you started to see him use his legs as well and not really force as many balls into coverage. Detroit played a lot of man coverage on the back end in the second half, which seems weird for a defense that can't really cover a lot of people. But they in their open field tackling, if I must say, it is absolutely terrible in the secondary, right? So as they got settled in, they allowed the pressure that they had put on San Francisco early to kind of shift back to them, because they were the ones that had, the 17-point halftime lead, right? And this game, I feel like, much like the Packers game, was a lot about missed opportunities for Detroit. When you look at what the opportunities that Detroit had in this game, and it was four in particular that I really felt cost them the game. And I think if any one of these four opportunities go in an opposite direction, in the other direction, then obviously I think the result of the game comes out differently, right? So the first one is the fourth down that you go for up 24-10, I believe it was at that point in the third quarter. You go for that and you put a ball. I mean, it wasn't a perfect throw by Jared Goff, but I personally thought that the throw was fine considering that he had a guy right in his face. And I mean, Jesus Christ, like, how much more perfect do you want that ball to be for Josh Reynolds? It's like he has the ability, like he has both hands on the ball and he drops it. So I think that throw, like I heard a lot of people today and last night kind of criticizing Jared Goff for the throw, but it's like I mean, he's an NFL receiver. Like let's come on, man. Like Josh Reynolds got to pull that ball in. You got to help your quarterback out, man. He's under pressure. He's not a great. I've seen him throw way worse balls than that people have caught under pressure. But so that's one. The second one is the would-be interception in the third quarter that hits 29. I can't remember what 29's name is, but it hits 29. It goes through his hands, off his helmet, off his face mask. Like, I mean, he couldn't have thrown a better interception to you if it hits you right in the helmet, right? Like, and that bounces up. They get the fortunate bounce. It bounces in Ayuk's hands, which looks like a touchdown. And upon review, the guy just barely, just by the grace of God, honestly, gets a hand on him to get him down at the 3. They score a touchdown later on that drive, right? So now you've introduced the balance that I talked about back into the game. You blew that opportunity. So now this becomes, I believe at that point, it's a one possession game. I believe it's 24-17 at that point. You have another drive. That gets killed on, I believe it was a 3rd and 6 or 3rd and 7, where Josh Reynolds is wide open on what looks like an in route, because he's running across the face of Jared Goff, and he's wide open, and Jared Goff puts a perfect ball on him that he drops. He drops it. So that kills another drive. San Francisco gets the ball back, walks that one down for a touchdown. So maybe there were 5 opportunities, because that's 3, and I still have 2 more, right? So The obvious one is the 27-24, the 27-24 fourth down going for it thing, right? And where I will defend Dan Campbell is that he has been aggressive all year, right? I think they led the league in fourth down attempts, and I believe they led the league in fourth down conversions this year, right? So in a way, it's like a team in basketball that shoots a lot of 3-pointers, right? You live by the three, you die by the three. The Warriors went through that for decades, right? They were a 3-point jump shooting team. And when the jump shot's not falling, guess what? You're doomed to get blown out, right? In this game, it kind of worked the same way because it was almost like, well, we got here with the aggressiveness. We're going to leave it here on the field with the aggressiveness, which in a way in a way, I don't have an issue with it, right? Because, well, okay, I don't have an issue in it from the standpoint that when you go with what got you here and it just doesn't work, that's fine, right? I'll talk a little bit later in a different video about Baltimore, how Baltimore, when they lost their game, was absolutely the opposite of how Detroit lost their game, right? Detroit lost their game because the aggressiveness was their undoing. Them being aggressive was absolutely their undoing, right? And I said when I look back, like when I think back, I thought about this last night as I was, thinking about when I was putting together my thoughts on this game. Like those fourth down calls kind of reminded me a lot of the Dallas game a few weeks ago, right? The big takeaway from the Dallas game was, oh, the refs messed the call up. But the takeaway for me was like Dan Campbell can be fucking reckless at times, right? Like he went for a 2-point conversion. They got the illegal, the illegal touching or ineligible downfield, whatever. They got a 5-yard penalty on that. For him to then go for 2 at the 7-yard line on the second play. So it wasn't, and they got lucky that Michael Parsons jumped off sides and they got a free play on that one. But on in what world are you going for 2 at the 7-yard line, right? Like I'm sure analytically it doesn't make sense because it seems like Dan Campbell is driven by the whole analytics crowd. Oh, if it's between 4th and 3 to 4th and 6 on a certain part of the field, you go for it, right? So it seems like he is driven by this analytics type of crowd. But I'm pretty sure in that Dallas game, I'm pretty sure there's no analytic statistic that tells you that no analytic statistic ever that tells you that going for 2 at the 7-yard line is a smart idea. That's not winning football. That's reckless football, right? So the takeaway in that game was like, man, could they go into the playoffs and Dan Campbell cost them a game with being reckless as opposed to being aggressive? Because it's different if in that situation you're not down 3. So I'll say it like this, right? If let's say you're in a nip and tuck game, like, hey, you just score a touchdown to almost tie it, and you go for 2 instead of kicking the extra point because you guys have had them on the ropes, you guys are kind of doing whatever you want, or you just feel like like there's not that much time left. That to me feels aggressive, not reckless, right? Last night, after you miss an opportunity, like it was very obvious that the momentum was on the side of San Francisco, right? And I think in that moment, you don't have tomorrow, right? Like at this point, it's win or go home, survive and advance, right? So your offense had been moving the ball not as well as they were in the first half or the first 2.5 quarters, but they were moving the ball to get it into scoring range. But you left what could have been 6 points out on the field. Excuse me. You left what could have been 6 points out on the field just basically for no reason, right? Like why leave those 6 points on the field if you didn't have to, right? And granted, like let me say, granted, the kicker's not the greatest, right? So that could have also factored into the decision, which is why I'm not like too like, oh, Dan Campbell's an idiot, da da da. Like, because when kickers have shown, I mean, Green Bay is sitting at home because their kicker missed a fucking 12-yard field goal to tie the game, right? So it's easy for me to sit here and say, it's a reckless call, which I still believe that it is. But I do also think that the factor of the kicker making the kick also matters, right? So the last opportunity that I think they really missed on to change the game, you're down 10, you have a last gasp, you drive the field, you don't use any timeouts. For some inexplicable reason, at the 2-yard line, they decide to run the ball. They line up in this heavy set. They give the ball to Montgomery, and they get stuffed, and which forces them to have to use a timeout um, after 3rd and goal to then score the touchdown on 4th. Like, in my estimation, that's just bad coaching, right? Like, you know that, and it's bad coaching because it lacks awareness of where you were in the game. Basically, we're in a situation where you're below the 2-minute warning. So you no longer have the 2-minute warning timeout. It's 3 timeouts or nothing at that point. And at the time in which they ran the ball, I believe they were at 1:10 left in the game, right? So you score the touchdown. So now you really only have, 56 seconds left with 2 timeouts. And you almost pretty much put it on the leg of your kicker to convert an onside kick. And I think when you do that, the chance of winning the game is little to none, right? So if you at least, even if at, let's say, 1:30, you say, you know what, we're gonna kick the field goal first, save our 3 timeouts, kick it deep to San Francisco, because we do, like I told you guys in the preview video, they have the second best run defense in football. And judging how Shanahan has been with blowing leads himself, I don't believe that they would have been super aggressive as far as trying to do something fancy, knowing that Detroit would have had to use all 3 timeouts, and then on top of that, drive the length of the field to get a touchdown, as opposed to trying to get a field goal, right? So I don't believe they would have been super aggressive. I think they would have made you use your timeouts, and maybe Kyle does get funky, but I think you, with those 3 timeouts, you at least give your team a chance to see the ball again, in that game, down by 1 possession. Granted that the kicker makes the kick, right? So that was kind of the Detroit side of it. From the San Francisco side, I just have to say I was actually very impressed with that game. Like, the overall takeaway was that Detroit kind of gave the game away, which I firmly believe. But there's always 2 sides to that coin, because to give the game away is one thing, but as the team that wins the game, you have to take advantage of those situations. You have to stay in the fight long enough mentally to know that when a guy gives you their opening, when a team gives you that opening, that you got to take advantage of it. And they did at every opportunity. Ayuk with the helmet catch, Brock Purdy in the second half, really dealing once that running game kind of got going. Christian McCaffrey, like, really just kind of being that anchor in the second half of both last week's game and this week's game, to where when they needed big plays offensively, they got them. And then their defense, with the response that they gave in the back half, because honestly, in the second half, it honestly seemed like Amon-Ra St. Brown was the only Detroit Lion that could catch a ball outside the um, outside the numbers, because Josh Reynolds had multiple drives. Laporta seemed like he disappeared in the second half. The running backs were ineffective in the second half. So it just seemed like St. Brown was like the only guy that was really like that Jared Goff could really go to. But then San Francisco did such a great job of starting to mix in zone, because it felt like they played a lot of man early and they were getting just destroyed, right? But then they started to mix in and started to confuse Jared Goff. They started to get pressure on Jared Goff. And just like the keys of the game, once they started to heat the pocket up, man, it turned into a totally different game, right? And for me, I definitely thought Kyle was going to melt down. Like once the game got to uh, at the half, I was pretty sure Kyle was going to melt down and try to spread it out and let Brock throw it all over the place. But to his credit, they came out in the second half in that first possession. I remember thinking like, damn, like Kyle is really like going with a balanced approach. Like, cause he ran the ball quite a bit on that first drive, and he let Brock Purdy kind of work and settle him in and get the game going again from a balanced perspective. And I was actually very, very impressed because we've seen Kyle fail in that situation a lot of different times, right? So you got to, and now when you look at Brock Purdy, you kind of got to change the narrative on the guy, right? Like he can be erratic with some of his throws, right? He can be, but I think if the run game is going well for him, the kid can really play. He can play. He really can. Like when you look at him, I think we have to, as much as we can criticize a guy for playing bad and losing, something has to be said about a guy who can not play well and still find a way. Because no matter what we say about Tom Brady being the GOAT or whatever, like Patrick Mahomes aside, like every quarterback at an elite level has had a bad playoff game, has had a subpar playoff game and found a way to win, right? I think Patrick Mahomes is probably the only one where I'm like maybe the Super Bowl against San Francisco a few years ago where he didn't play a great game, but he found a way to pull it out. But Brock Purdy is showing that type of clutch gene, I guess, right? Like clutch gene. He led him on a great drive last week that essentially put that game away. He led him on multiple drives this week. Like I'm not fully sold on him yet because he did throw some balls that were very much so in play for Detroit to take advantage of. Because I would say Detroit probably dropped. Like last week, he threw maybe 4 balls that I thought should have been intercepted by Green Bay. And he probably threw, he had one that was intercepted. He probably threw 3 that should have been intercepted, right? That kind of worked out in their favor. So for me, like I give them a lot of credit. I'm looking forward to seeing their game plan and how they look against Kansas City 4 years later. I am favoring the Chiefs, obviously, because I think not necessarily, well, I guess the Patrick Mahomes thing, but when I think about what Snead and McDuffie can do to 2 receivers, it's like, man, where are they? Like, where is the rest of the offense going to come from once? Because I imagine Snead, they're going to game plan for Snead to follow Ayuk around, and they're going to have McDuffie follow, probably not follow, but whenever Debo's lined up in the slot, I'm pretty sure you're going to have McDuffie all over him as well. So I'm very, very interested to see how they game plan, how Steve Wilkes game plans for Mahomes. But you just got to tip your hat to San Francisco for staying in it and just taking advantage of the opportunities when they presented themselves, because you knew at some point if you could get 1 4th down stop or 1 missed field goal or 1 timely turnover, you're going to be in a position to be able to get back in the game, and Detroit gave it to you right on time. So hats off, like great win for the 49ers. I'll talk a little bit in a different video about Dan Campbell and John Harbaugh or whatnot. I didn't want to spend too much time kind of mulling over that, but tell me what you guys think, man. Like, how did you guys feel about the game? Who do you guys have winning? And leave it in the comments below. Like, subscribe, comment on the video, tell a friend, share it with a friend, man. And I'll see y'all next time. Peace.